In our busy lives today, it's convenient, isn't it, to shop for food in supermarkets? Our meat and fish come in plastic wrappers. We pop ready meals into the microwave to save time. And a lot of the goodies we enjoy, like cakes and jam, are pre made for us in factories. It's kind of easy to forget that our food comes from the land. And I wonder, in forgetting this, do we also forget a bit of ourselves? Welcome to Belonging Across Cultures, the podcast that asks, how can we move from difference to connection and build better lives and a better world? I'm your host, Yang-May Ooi. I'm a cross-cultural advocate and author. So in today's episode, I'm excited to share with you my conversation with Bod Griffiths, one-time city trader and now the founder of Vale House Kitchen in Somerset, England. We talk about how we can feel a sense of belonging to different places at different times of our lives, and also how traditional ways of preparing and enjoying food can reconnect us with heritage, family, and ultimately our humanity. Bod Griffiths, you spent 20 years or so in London as a futures broker. What was that life like, and what did you love about London?
I was about 13. I remember we went on a school trip to the stock exchange. Um, and back in those days, it doesn't happen now. There were all the people in the colored jackets waving their arms around. And I thought, oh, that looks quite exciting. So I decided that I was going to be one of those people. I started work in London when I was 21. So, like 8 years later, that happened. And I was one of those people for a while on the floor in the colored jackets, waving my arms around. I was a floor broker for a while, and then I ended up being a futures broker in the office. As a young person in London, certainly working in finance back in the 90s, it was quite hectic. It was good fun. It was very long hours. Like we'd be in the office at 6 and we probably wouldn't leave till 8. There'd be a lot of sort of client entertaining and all of that. So I absolutely loved it. And I lived in Bow in the East End. I had this amazing tiny, tiny flat that I absolutely loved. And it wasn't far from there to sort of the city. I loved London. I mean, I'd spent, a lot of my early adult life there. A lot of my great friends are still from London. I think London is a very exciting place to live in, certainly when you're in your 20s and 30s. A lot of socializing, going out. There's lots to see and do. And I do think, however, you get to a stage, and certainly for me, that was where I met my wife, Annie. Myself and Annie met in 2010 when I was 40. And I think you do naturally get to a time whereby it feels like a good idea to leave London. So I was originally from the West Country. It was my plan, aim, life plan, whatever you want to call it, to move back to the West Country at some stage. And we found Vale House and moved, took the plunge, left London, moved here, and the rest is history.
We get a sense that London is a place full of energy, full of dynamism throughout history, and that it's the city for the young. And I feel now, I'm 60 now, and I was there in my 20s through to my 30s and 40s. And London belonged to me back then, but now it belongs to a new generation of energetic, frenetic,
I agree.
mad young people.
100%. I think you've really summed it up quite well there. I think London is generally full of younger people, and we've been at Vale House now almost 14 years. And what I find really bizarre is in the last 14 years, I've probably been back to London maybe 10 or so times. And people sort of say, oh, don't you miss it? Well, I guess there are bits of it that maybe I do miss. But when I have gone back, and maybe this is like the 50-year-old me now talking, I used to be on the tube every morning at like 5:45 from Clapham Common up into the city. And when I get on the tube now, there's just loads of people, and it's all a bit like, oh my God, where did all these people come from? I think it's quite interesting when you leave. You, a sort of a part of you leaves with you, if that makes sense.
And so it's a slice of history, what you've just mentioned, your early start of your career in those coloured jackets. And I
Yes.
guess it would be really interesting just to record it and to share it with our listeners. Could you just relive that a little bit more for
Oh,
us? And in particular, what the coloured jackets were all about?
so, I used to work on the live floor, which stood for the London International Financial Futures Exchange, which, if any of your listeners are in London now, is where the Royal Exchange is in the middle of the city. And it's now all very high-end shops. There used to be a trading floor with lots of different pits. They were called pits that traded different products. So we did financial futures. So this was pre the euro and all of that. So you'd have, a pit that traded short-end German products, long-end German products, Italian products, sterling products. You had two lots of color jackets, actually. You had people in yellow jackets who were the runners, which I started off as, who you spend a lot of time running from the pits back to the people on the phones with bits of paper that had orders on, which sounds very antiquated, but it worked. The colored jackets designated the different firms. So you'd have a person on the phone, the broker on the phone, he would shout the order to someone in the pit. And the colored jackets was so you could spot your trader in the pit. I started off with a firm called Gelderman, and then I moved to a firm called ED&F Man. I've still got my own man jacket, and their jackets were really gaudy. Like they were really bright. Like the Gelderman jacket was like bright pink and blue. The ED&F Man jacket was sort of like almost a fluorescent green and black. And the reason for that is so you could see your trader in the pit to be able to signal the orders. And it was all done with hand signals, and it really worked. Like it was a really efficient system. It was either 90, somewhere between 98 and 2000. And then everything went on to screen trading. But people nowadays would think it's just ridiculous. How could that work? But seriously, it was really efficient and worked really, really well. They used to call me the graduate idiot because I'd come from university. I went to university at Reading and did economics. And a lot of people on the trading floors, how can I put this politely? I mean, yeah, there were a lot of East End barrow boys, and it wasn't populated with lots of university graduates.
So now you were a West Country lad. So
Well,
that's quite a different lifestyle. Could you tell us about life in the West Country and what it is in contrast to London, what you love about that part of the world and also, rural Britain generally?
so I was born in Barnstable in North Devon. My father was in the Air Force. He was a fighter pilot. So we moved a lot in my childhood. Sometimes it would be every 6 months. Sometimes it would be every 2 years. We lived all over the UK. We lived in the States. We lived in Germany for a very long time. But I always had this sort of connection, mainly to the West Country. I went to boarding school between Cheltenham and Cirencester when I was 12. And the school that I went to, it was an incredible place. It's sort of a great big building on a hill in the middle of nowhere. And at that stage, it was quite a small for a boarding school. So we had the run of like, I don't know, it must have been hundreds and hundreds of acres. So we would spend a lot of time just, there used to be a place called the Wilderness, which was this big wood that ran up behind there. So we'd be up the Wildy, there was the park. So my mum's mum, my grandmother, she lived in Warwick. Grandma Molly, amazing person. And initially, because my parents lived abroad, because they were in Germany, I used to spend a lot of time at Ex-Yachts also some holidays. I'd go and stay with her, and I think a lot of the love of food and the appreciation of sort of seasonality and making food from scratch, if you like. She was a proper Aunt Bessie. So she made all of her own bread, all of her own cakes. In January, we'd always be making marmalade. In the autumn, we'd always be making chutney. She had this huge Bramley apple tree in their back garden. And I remember we used to religiously pick all these apples. We used to make tons of chutney. I've still got her recipe. I still make apple chutney to her recipe to this day. Even when I lived in London, and much as I wouldn't leave London every weekend because there was lots of exciting stuff to do in London, quite a bit of the time I would leave London and go fishing. I fished my poor Grandpa Sis, who was married to Grandma Molly. They lived quite near the Grand Union Canal in Warwick. And from the age of about 5, I would get this poor man up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and we'd go and sit by the canal watching a float like all day. So I think a lot of the things you develop and learn in early life, you carry with you. So I've fly fished for a really long time, and I think through Grandma Molly as well, I've made my own sloe gin, and pick things from the hedgerows. And even when I lived in London, I would leave London quite a bit to go out to the countryside. And thing I find, I know we were talking earlier. I'm off to the D salmon fishing at the end of this week, but I found all of that quite meditative. So from being in a very high pressure, slightly crazy environment, I don't know, 16 hours a day, which is sort of what work was like, certainly in my 20s and early 30s, to escape that and go and, some people might think it's mad that you're like waist deep in a river with a great big rod casting all day, and actually you're probably not going to catch anything. But for me, and even to this day, I would fly fish all day almost if I could. I find it's just something, I don't know. I think you get some sort of connection maybe with nature or whatever you want to call it. So I have this real love of the countryside. I shoot, I fish. Originally, I did both of those things, and even now, really to sort of almost gain ingredients. So shooting's quite an interesting one. I know shooting is quite Marmite, and people have very structured and strong views about it. But if I go out shooting, I will always bring back loads of birds. I will eat loads of birds. And, I don't really fully get the whole just shooting for the sake of shooting, if that makes sense. And a lot of the shooting we do now is on fairly small days, and we shoot with very like-minded people that also will take lots of birds with them. And I think there's been a big growth in that. I think this again leads into Vale House Kitchen. I think people are a lot more interested nowadays in where their food comes from. I think they want to have a bit more of a connection with their food. And certainly a lot of the things we do here, and it was one of the premises of sort of how Vale House Kitchen came into being, was about that sort of connection with food and country and all of that.
This is a perfect point for me to ask you. What inspired you to move out of London with your crazy life as a futures broker, and actually, I suppose, go back to your roots to create something that is not just for you but for other people? So, what does Vale House Kitchen offer, and what are the values around which that business is founded?
So, I went to New York on business, got a good friend there. And he has a sort of an estate would be far too grand, but a house with some land in Calicut, which is the Catskills, about 3 hours north of New York. And we went up there, and there were a group of us meeting there for a friend's birthday after we'd been on business. And this friend of mine had this old army Jeep, and we got there, myself and him got there before anyone else. He was like, right, I'm going to sort of run you around the estate. And we went about, well, not even 500 yards. He clipped this rock, and this Jeep fell down this ravine with both of us in it. And I was catapulted out first, and I wasn't as seriously hurt as he was because he was behind the steering wheel. The Jeep went over quite a few times, and he was dumped out at the end. The Jeep landed on top of him, whereas I was catapulted quite a long way, actually, and came to in this big pile of leaves, and managed to claw my way back up to the track, and bizarrely was almost run over by one of my friends who was arriving. I think it was his birthday, actually. And he had to go off and get help. And this friend of ours who was seriously hurt and is now absolutely fine, we're both sort of still in the land of the living. He was flown off to hospital. I sort of stayed for the weekend, but I was quite badly broken one of my collarbones, and I had a big lump on my leg. They were worried that I'd fractured my femur, which I hadn't. And I was flown back from the UK, came back to Bath. We hadn't been living in Vale House for that long. I think we'd been here about 6 months. So I came back here on the Monday, and on the Wednesday, the company that I'd worked for 20 years went belly up in the financial crisis. So I'd gone from being healthy and employed to a bit invalided and unemployed in the space of about 4 days. And Annie was quite, I don't know, desperate's the wrong word, but she was a bit like, look, you're sort of quite fed up with what you're doing. You need to make a change. She said, I think the universe is trying to give you a bit of a sign that it's time for a change. So I ended up going back to another firm with my old business partner, who's still one of my best friends. But in the meantime, there's a company called Keo Films who originally did all of the River Cottage series. It was, I think, the production company that Hugh set up to actually make River Cottage. And bizarrely, I saw in one of the newspapers, there was like an ad that said, if you're thinking about changing your life, like, please get in touch. And they were thinking about making a pilot. So anyway, the building that Vale House Kitchen is now in, previous to that, was a bit of a sort of a ramshackly garage type building. And we'd had this idea, myself and Annie had been to a River Cottage game course, and she said, it's amazing. When you were on that course, you just completely lit up and you were like, wow, this is incredible. And, it's great, but actually we could do it differently. And if people went out and actually shot that bird before they then butchered it. And so the sort of seed was there. So I said to Annie, look, there's this thing Keo are talking, people that want to change their life. Should I send in, like, there was a big form to fill in. And Annie was like, yeah, definitely send it in. And I was like, yeah, there's no harm, nothing will come of it. So I filled in this great big thing, which was all about leaving finance and going to set up a cookery school, basically. And I think the following morning, I got a phone call and they said, like, you're one of the 8 people that we selected. I mean, it was a bit crazy, really. So I then there was then a date, which wasn't too far it was like a couple of weeks later. You spent an hour being filmed with a chap called Tom Hunt, who had actually made a River Cottage spin-off series called Three Hungry Boys. And you had an hour with him and you sort of outlined what you were doing now, what your plan is, how you're trying to change your life. And then after that, you had like an hour with a life coach who then sort of came up with all of these reasons why you should go and do what you wanted to do. And in the end, nothing came of it. Like the program wasn't made, but that's sort of, for me, slightly irrelevant, because at the end of the session, they said, right, we want you to action one thing today that will start this journey and start this idea that you've got. So we've got an amazing architect who lives in the house up above us called William Bertram, who in architect world is quite famous. He's King Charles's architect. He's designed lots of amazing buildings in Bath. He made William and Harry's first tree house, and he's an amazing chap. Anyway, I jumped on the train from Paddington back to Bath and I phoned him up. I had his phone number and I said, William, I've got this idea about this ramshackle building and turning it into a cookery school. Like, is that possible? Like, is this just ridiculous? And he was, oh my boy, what a brilliant idea. And he came down the following morning and I've still got it somewhere. We sort of sketched out the plan for Vale House Kitchen literally on the back of an envelope. And he said, oh, well, there's no way you'll be able to afford me to do this. But my friend Ted, who is also a really good friend of ours, who's an architect, he lives in the next village. So I contacted Ted, and from that, it all just happened. Planning took quite a while because our house is grade 2 listed and all of that sort of stuff. And actually, there's a chap called Tim Madams who was really, really influential in Vale House Kitchen at the beginning. Tim was an ex-River Cottage tutor. He just left River Cottage at the time and he was setting up his own consultancy business. And Tim was really, really instrumental in helping us set up the school and equipment and how it would work and all of that. And then everything just sort of happened. It probably took us, I don't know, a year, maybe a year and a half to get all the planning permission, get the building work done. We invested a huge amount of time and energy and everything into it. And at the end of it, sort of Vale House Kitchen came into being. As to what we offer now, I guess it's sort of evolved, but it was always really built about reconnect. We always talk about reconnecting people with food. There was a day where I'd been out fly fishing. We've got a lovely veg patch here, which sort of somehow bizarrely fits into the story. But I'd been out fly fishing. I'd caught this rainbow trout. I bought this trout back. We, gutted and filleted this trout. And then we had some potatoes from the garden and some broccoli and some other bits that we got. And I remember cooking this meal and I said to Annie, God, it's amazing, isn't it? If you could teach people like to catch a fish and to grow some things. And I always think that if you've got some sort of connection with what's on your plate, it's always going to taste better. And we I think a lot of the ethos behind what we do, there's a lot of field to fork in our courses. There's a lot of connecting people with sort of old school skills, if that makes sense. So you don't have to go back that probably less than 50 years, and everyone would have some sort of butchery skills. People would be able to make bread. People would be able to preserve, whether it be turning fruit into jam or turning pork into bacon and hams and all of that, because you needed to be able to do it. Nowadays, that's not so much the case. I'm not going to sit here and bash supermarkets because we've got an 11-year-old and I spend lots of time buying ice lollies and drinks and all of that stuff in there. But I do think that if you take the time to invest in the food that you're making, it is gonna it's probably gonna taste better anyway because you're probably gonna be using better food, and B, it's probably gonna be healthier for you as well. Again, I don't want to bash huge food conglomerates, but there's a lot of additives and ingredients that go into certainly modern processed food that probably not very good for you. And if you are willing to take a little bit of time and do it yourself, what you're going to end up eating is health wise, if nothing else, going to be a lot better for you. So we do offer, I think, quite bespoke, small courses where people can have a fun experience, but an informative experience. All of our courses are really hands-on, only because that's how I learn. And I think it's a lot better if you've got someone showing you how to do it, and then you go away and do it yourself. So then when you leave Vale House Kitchen, when you get home, you're like, oh, yeah, I did this. And yeah, I can do it again.
So, in the interest of full disclosure for our listeners, I came along to a Vale House Kitchen course, which is how Bod and I met. And I felt very much that, I go to the supermarket, I buy my shrink wrapped meat. Often it's quite good quality and it's quite tasty. But I feel that as a meat eater, I need to know how to handle the pig, whatever animal from which this piece of pork chop or whatever has come from, and not to be squeamish about it, and actually to feel that connection. I grew up in Malaysia, and until very recently, my mum would used to go to the wet market. And that was absolutely fascinating. We would take my English friends and kind of freak them out, because she'd go along. And when she moved to Kuala Lumpur from the small town of Taiping, when she married my father, my grandma introduced her around to all the people in the stalls and said, "This is my daughter-in-law. You look after her carefully. You don't cheat her, right?"
Brilliant.
And so she'd go to the chicken man, and there were all these little chickens in the cage, and she'd point to the chicken she wanted. And he said, "Oh, yeah, no problem." And by the time she did her circuit, she'd be back and the chicken would be plucked. So he would kill the chicken right there and then, gut it, defeather it in hot water. And she'd come back and there would be this completely fresh chicken. And then she'd go and buy some beef, and there was the cow, the enormous slab, dead with all the bits, and he'd cut it all up and so on and so forth. So that was quite normal for me. I'd trail after her. And I just wanted to partly reconnect with that. So when I came along for it was butchery and smoking and curing course, it was fascinating to see half the pig, dead pig, very dry, very clean on the slab, and to take our turn to, carve it up. And to handle the meat. And it felt, and you were telling us in the class about that particular pig that was from a small holding, and how it was looked after, and how you could tell that it was happy because of the different layers of fat. And it felt really like a connection to the food, to the land, and very respectful of this animal that was going to give us nourishment. And then you arranged for us to have lunch, a barbecued lunch from the pork that we had cut up. And it felt really, really special to have that connection. And I just want to share this other story. When I was 18, I went to stay on Tyree, another Scottish connection, with a school friend. And they had this crofter's cottage. And we went out on a little boat, and we threw over these lines of hooks just as the boat was trundling along. It was one of those outboard motorboats. And we caught mackerel.
Amazing.
And we reeled it all in. I'd never had this experience before. And
Brilliant.
we gutted it. on the boat and
Yeah,
through the entrails out into the sea, and the seagulls followed this boat.
yeah, of
And
course.
I was covered in mackerel muck and it was really smelly. And then this is the exciting bit. You love this. They had built this little sort of smoking thing with rocks from the beach, and we smoked it using seaweed.
Yeah.
And we
Oh,
had smoked mackerel. It was just amazing. And I've always remembered that. And so this, again, connection to the sea, connection to the food, using seaweed to cook, it was absolutely fabulous. So I absolutely love what you're doing there. And can you just, because I didn't come on your shooting and fishing bits of it, could you just talk a little bit more about that aspect?
I fished since I was as long as I can remember. I think I started shooting. We had a boy in our class who was a farmer, and they had a farmer's shoot. So I'm guessing the first time I'd have gone out and shot something, I was probably in my early teens. Um, and shot a pheasant, and then we went back, and this friend of mine's mum would have prepped it, and we'd have eaten it. And I think a lot of people nowadays, there's a big disconnect from uh, catching something and killing it and eat it, whether it be a fish or shooting a bird. Or I'm quite lucky. I do a little bit of deer stalking locally, which is something that I've got into mainly because venison is an incredible meat that we should all be eating lots more of. Certainly post COVID, the deer population in the UK has gone a bit bonkers. I think everyone should fly fish because it's just a brilliant thing to do. We go and fish at a lake called Manningford at the moment, just outside Devizes. And how can I put this politely? Like it's nicely stocked, it's well stocked. So if you've got someone doing something for the first time, you want them to have a good chance of catching a fish. And I'm not going to say that everyone that comes on our courses that catches a fish, but a lot of people do. Most people do. And then the following day, we always run a fish like cookery course. Not everyone comes on both days, but I think it's quite nice that if you have caught something, it's quite beneficial to be able to come the following day and see how to gut it and fillet it, and make all sorts. We always smoke. Um, we actually mackerel is. It's funny you talk about mackerel. Mackerel are one of my favorite fish. As a fish to eat, mackerel is a good fish, if that makes sense. I think it's a 4 on the MSC list. Like 5 is really good. 1 you definitely shouldn't eat. I think mackerel were a 5 and they're down to a 4 a little bit because of big trawler fishing up sort of near Iceland and up there. But we always smoke fish, generally mackerel, or if someone's caught trout, we'll smoke trout. So I think it's quite nice again that we go back to talking about that connection, which what you were talking about with catching the mackerel and even going to a wet market. I know we're in a very privileged position. We keep our own pigs. The local butcher, I know if I go and get a lamb from him, it'll have been running around behind the house at some stage during its life. I'm well aware that everyone's not in that sort of unique position that we are. However, all people are generally consumers of food. I think that you are able to make decisions that ultimately can have quite a big impact. And a lot of I completely understand, for instance, the whole vegan movement at the moment. I'm probably as far removed from a vegan as you can be, but I sort of get it. And I actually had a conversation. I was at a food event hosted by Visit Bath last year, and I ended up sitting next to this chap, and he said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I sort of launched into the Vale House Kitchen, catch it, cook it, eat it, shoot it. And I said, "Oh, how about you?" And he was a vegan. And he actually said, he was like, "Oh, yeah, even being a vegan, I can sort of get where you're coming from." And I think a lot of people, and certainly younger people now, there's a lot of worry about the planet, which I 100% get. I think there's a lot more in common with someone like, say, like myself, who strolls 2 miles over that hill, shoots a roebuck, brings it back, skins it, butchers it, eats some of it, puts the rest of it in the freezer. You're probably doing more for the environment by doing that than eating half a ton of avocados that have been grown in Central America, rainforest been chopped down, there's been crime associated with it, and they've been flown halfway around the world. And we run a game shooting course, but again, it's the same thing. If you've never picked up a shotgun in your life, we take you from that, which you clays all morning, and then we have a couple of drives of pheasants. You've obviously got someone standing with you in the afternoon, so people get the experience of what it's like to go out game shooting. And then the following day, we do a big game butchery cookery day, and we show you how you can take most of the meat off a pheasant without plucking and drawing it. We generally get some partridge as well, because partridge is a lot smaller and it's a bit easier to pluck and draw a partridge than it is a pheasant, arguably. So it comes back to this connection with what's on your plate. I think that's a really good thing. I mean, big food, sort of intensive food farming, I'm as anti that as anyone. Uh, and certainly sort of chickens and pigs get the real bad end of intensified farming. Again, and we're quite lucky living in the West Country that there's a lot of regenerative farms. The pig that I know that we butchered had come from a chap that doesn't live far from here, that his pigs are outside all the time. You know, the only time they would go inside is probably to farrow to give birth to piglets, and the rest of the time they're outside. And they use the pigs to sort of churn up fields and fertilize fields that they then grow crops in. So I'm a big believer that, you know, eat less meat, but eat more good meat, if that makes any sense.
I suppose for millennia, humankind has been eating animals through the nomadic lifestyle and then eventually nurturing them in small farms and small holdings. And it's only really in the modern age where we've got the big industrial way of treating meat. And so it's a connection not just with nature, but with our historical deep, deep past as human beings. And I also read somewhere that in terms of the Native Americans, that when they kill a buffalo or something to eat, they give thanks. There's a ritual of giving thanks. Thank you, buffalo, for giving your life to nourish us. Versus the invaders who came and then just shot buffalo. Oh, yeah, this is kind of fun. Let's just kill them all, and wiped out the buffalo. So it's a very, very different sense of respect and connection with the wilderness and animals. And also, what you're saying is that this is all sort of implied by what you're saying, but probably another long episode around the cycle of land management in terms of what you said about the pigs and the deer, that actually they need to be culled and managed, and that there's a way of doing it that doesn't waste. So it kind of comes back into into food, and there's a sort of a healthy cycle around that. And finally, picking up on your point about eating less meat, but eating good meat. And well, gosh, it's so expensive to buy organic meat. And it's really annoying to have to go and queue in the butchers. It's much easier to go to the supermarket. But actually, if all of us thought, well, actually, okay, life is life. I'll get my supermarket shop, but maybe once a month or every now and then, I'll go and buy some nice organic meat from the butcher. And those people who are already doing that, can you do it a little bit more, so that it's, we all can't be perfect, but what's the next best thing that we can do? So
also, to pick up on that, I think if you do buy good, like for instance, there's an amazing place near us called Nempnut Pastures, who have these incredible organic chickens. And yes, they're expensive, but boy, they taste incredible. Like, they don't taste like any chicken you'd get from the supermarket. And you're able, and again, this is maybe me harking back to spending far too much time with my grandmother, but I remember, you'd have a roast chicken on a Sunday, which would then feature on a Monday, and then probably a Tuesday and a Wednesday as well. So I'm a big believer that, pay decent money for the meat that you're going to eat, but make it last. In our household, we'll have roast chicken, and then there's always going to be some chicken left that we'll eat on a Monday, and my mum always used to make this amazing, we used to call it bacon chicken rice, which was literally rice with leftover chicken and some bacon in it and soy sauce. And, I still make that. And then I'll make a stock from the bones. And then on the Tuesday, we'll have some sort of soup, which again, there's probably not going to be much chicken left by Tuesday, but, we use the stock as well. So you can sort of almost make one meal go a lot further.
Now that you've brought up your dear old grandmother again and your mum,
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about your values around the preparation of food in the traditional way? And again, we are more and more losing touch with that. And I'm the first one to put my hand up, because every now and then I'm quite happy to have a ready meal because it's quick. Can you talk a bit more about your values around preparing food in the traditional way and cooking some of these traditional recipes like jam and so on?
A lot of that comes into preservation. I still make a lot of marmalade. I actually teach some marmalade courses here, and that is because A, I really love marmalade, and B, if you shop bought marmalade is just never what you think it's going to be. And if you make it yourself, it's a bit, again, you have to invest a bit of time in making jam, for instance. You can make raspberry jam in like half an hour. But I think it, again, when you talk about the ethos and why it comes back to a time where you would have a huge surplus of something. And, if we rewound, so I mean, a lot of and you'll have found on the course that you're with us, so sort of making things like salamis and bacon and hams, you'd go back to a time where there wasn't any refrigeration. You'd have a time of a huge amount of plenty, generally followed by winter, which in the northern hemisphere would be followed by a time of where there wouldn't be very much to eat at all. And you needed to do all of those sort of old connected skills so that you would have something to eat. Now, obviously, that doesn't really apply nowadays because there's food all year round. But I think it is really, really important. And this is something that I'm trying to teach our son at the moment, to sort of connect and make things like, if you make marmalade and if you make it properly, it will last. Like, I've got some marmalade in the larder that I know is like 2 or 3 years old. And I know when I open it, it's going to be absolutely fine. The same with sort of making things like salamis. I'm quite lucky. I spend a lot of time with Steve Lamb, who you'll have met on your course. And Steve's a sort of an expert in all of that sort of smoking and curing. But now I make a lot of our own cured meats. I make our own salamis. I'll make bresaola. I'll make copper, all of that sort of thing. Mainly because it's a good way to honor the whole animal. And also they taste amazing. And certainly if you do it yourself and you can tweak things and like hone your skill, if you want to call it that, you end up with some amazing stuff we as a species have been doing for sort of, 10,000 years. So to me, I find it really important's the wrong word. I just, it's just something that I now do. A good example is we've got a huge, up by the veg patch, we've got a wall that this huge loganberry bush is the wrong word, plant just grows along this wall. And every year we don't get many. We probably maybe get 2 or 3 kilos of these loganberries. And loganberries are quite interesting. They're sort of the first of the soft fruits. They're sort of a cross between like a really tart raspberry and a blackberry. And to eat them, they're almost a bit sour, but they make amazing jam. And every year, myself and Michael, our son, will go up there, we'll pick all these loganberries, and we'll make jam out of it. And we only ever get, I don't know, 6 to 10 jars of jam. We actually then use them in the school. Sometimes when you would have come, you'd have probably had some of our own bacon for breakfast. But sometimes we make drop scones with our own homemade jam. People are like, oh, this jam's incredible. Like, where can I buy this? Well, you can't. And you can't really buy loganberries commercially, as far as I'm aware. But, you need to invest that time and sort of grow it yourself and make the jam yourself. And then you end up with this incredible thing.
There's something just wonderful about, you have this big grin on your face as you're talking. And I think what I've picked up is that, you love spending time with your son, and the two of you go off and pick loganberries and you make this together. And I remember times when I was younger, 6, 7 years old, and I'd watch my mum and my grandma make cakes. And of course, you get involved, you help to do it, and then you lick yeah, exactly. And there's a connection. It's a human connection. It's a bonding. It's a father-dad thing, mother-daughter thing. And there's something really special about it. And I loved coming to your course and doing the bacon and the salami because we did it all together. There were about 8 of us and the 2 of you, Bod and Steve. And we then followed your instructions, took the bacon home and kept it in the fridge. And it was great. So it was really, really exciting. So my partner roasted hers as a bacon joint because she had the back bacon. I got the streaky bacon. And that was absolutely delicious because it was slightly smoked, it was slightly salty, but it wasn't too salty. There was taste compared to commercial bacon that you buy, from the supermarket. I haven't eaten my streaky bacon yet, but we're going to have it this weekend. But I sliced it very thinly and it's ready to go. The salami was absolutely delicious, and
Yeah.
there's still one of it going, and we're kind of eking
Brilliant.
it out because it's so lovely. But of course, we now know how to make it, and
Yeah.
there is something also special about eating something that you have made with yourself. And of course,
Yeah.
we all cook and we can take pride in our roast chicken or whatever. But doing something like this, which seems, as you say, connected to traditional things, and maybe most of us don't really know how to do it. You just buy it from the shop. But
Yeah.
when you make it yourself and you've learned how to do it, it's like, wow, it tastes even better. I think we should probably wrap up now. What is your hope for the future of food in the UK?
Oh, that's a great question. I hope that there's less intensive farming. And I do understand, if you've got 7 billion people on the planet and you need to feed them all, you're probably going to have to sacrifice something somewhere. However, I hope that people take more care with the food that they're buying. There's a big thing at the moment. There's something called off the table. As I said, I'm off to Scotland on Sunday to go salmon fishing, and wild Atlantic salmon in a lot of the world now, certainly the UK especially, they're now on the red list, and there's hardly any of them left. And a lot of that's to do with aquaculture, fish farms, and we should definitely not be eating farmed salmon. Farmed salmon is like the devil's work, both environmentally, with respect to the fish. It's something actually that we talk quite a bit about on our fish courses and in general. But I think one thing that I hope is that people can make better choices. And if like everyone makes one better choice, then there's a chance that food and farming and in general will all get a little bit better. Just be a little bit more conscious about what you put on your plate and how it's got there and how you eat it. I know that I'm in quite a privileged position, but I'm not going to say that I never eat something that's bad in inverted commas. But I do choose to take have that choice. And instead of having smoked salmon at Christmas, for instance, there's an amazing company called Chalk Stream Trout, which breed these incredible trout. And these trout are farmed, but they're farmed in a way that is less environmentally damaging. You'll find that most trout that are farmed in the river on land, if you like, as opposed to in the sea, environmentally, it's a lot better for the environment than a big aquaculture out at sea. So I will buy half a chalk stream salmon, then I will cure that myself, and then I'll cold smoke that myself because I've learned how to do that. And then you have this incredible, in inverted commas, smoked salmon. It's smoked trout, but it's probably more delicious because you've made it yourself and smoked it yourself. And environmentally, for the planet, it's a lot better as well. So hopes going forward for food would be people even if someone just made one choice, that can actually, over a long period of time, have actually a really, really big impact.
I was talking to Bod Griffiths of Vale House Kitchen. The views expressed by my guests are entirely their own and do not necessarily reflect my views. For credits, photos, and links to some of the things we talked about, go to the show notes page on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. There are also more podcast episodes, written articles, and other bits and pieces on the main website at belongingacrosscultures.uk. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or rating or follow Belonging Across Cultures. It helps those algorithms highlight the show to more listeners. Please also do tell your friends about this podcast and share a bit of belonging with more people. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram as @TigerSpiritUK and on LinkedIn with my name, Yang-May Ooi. Thanks for listening and see you again soon.